Ógra, fáilte chuig an céadú commemoru an Cllr Sinn Mícheál Breathnach. Welcome to the 100th anniversary commemoration of Cllr Mícheál Breathnach. This is an annual commemoration organised by the Mícheál Breathnach Ógra Sinn Féin Common in Galway. Normally we gather with the Breathnach family and other comrades throughout Galway. Due to the circumstances surrounding COVID-19, we are unable to do so as we normally would. Firstly, I would like to send my solidarity to the Breathnach family and thank them for their support, and to pledge again a commitment from young Republicans in Galway that we will continue to work for the Republic for which their loved one died. We aim to be a voice for young people and to provide a space where young Republicans can organise, educate themselves and advance the cause of the youth of this island. Young people have always been central to the political struggle in Ireland, from the boys and girls of na Fianna Éireann and Cumann na Galini to Youth Against Armagh and H Blocks. Young people have always organised themselves to try and help the cause of Irish freedom. The young have suffered too much in the past 100 years to stand by. From forced emigration, austerity, student debt, a mental health epidemic, and the lack of affordable housing, young people suffer immensely, and this generation has inherited a dying planet, 2 once-in-a-lifetime recessions, and an inaccessible property market. We in Ógra Sinn Féin seek to be a voice for young people and an avenue through which we can channel our anger in productive political activism. We take inspiration from our patriot dead and cherish the legacy of resistance they have left us. In this spirit, we totally condemn the recent demolition of the O'Rahilly House and acknowledge that our heritage must be better protected by all concerned in local and national government going forward. We urge all young people of all backgrounds to come along and be involved in Sinn Féin and be part of the biggest opposition to crony capitalism in the 26 counties and lead the charge for a border poll in the north. These are achievable, and only by becoming part of the fight back can we resist the oppression that has hindered and damaged the lives of so many who have gone before us. Today we remember Cllr Mícheál Breathnach. We honour his courage and dedication to our struggle for freedom, and we will continue to work to build the Republic that he and so many others have made the ultimate sacrifice for. Cllr Mícheál Breathnach.
On the 19th of October 1920, Galway City Councillor Mícheál Breathnach was abducted from his home and executed by British Crown forces at the Long Walk in Galway City. This was a reprisal for successful IRA operations against the forces of occupation in Galway City and County. Galway was a garrison town, home of the Connacht Rangers and of Queen's College Galway. The trappings of British rule and oppression dominated the city, with installations such as barracks, courts, a prison and police stations. Above all else, the poverty in the city and in rural Galway reflected 700 years of colonisation. The west of Ireland had been ravaged by the Great Hunger, and the legacy of death, poverty, hardship and immigration impacted the people of Galway tremendously. Land wars throughout the late 19th century bred a spirit of resistance among the peasant and working classes in rural Galway, and increased industrialisation and access to the university would see a changing dynamic in Galway City. The IRB organised agrarian agitation, and they ran secret societies to pressure landlords and cattle grazers. RIC reports indicated that much of rural Galway in the years prior to World War I was disaffected. RUC brutality in enforcing evictions created the conditions for rebellion. In Dublin, Easter week 1916, the men and women of the IRB, Irish Volunteers, Irish Citizen Army, Cumann and the youth of na Fianna Éireann rose up to break the connections with Britain. The rising was intended to be a national uprising, and Galway saw the largest mobilisation of volunteers outside of Dublin City. Under the command of Liam Mellows, Irish volunteers attacked police barracks at Oranmore and Claren Bridge. Initially, the rising was viewed with hostility, but the executions of the leaders, along with the threat of conscription in 1918, led to an upsurge in nationalist sentiment and support for Sinn Féin. County Galway returned 4 Sinn Féin TDs in December 1918 in a general election which saw Sinn Féin claim 73 out of 105 seats. The foundation of Dáil Éireann in 1919 and its subsequent suppression led to the outbreak of the Tan War, in which Galwegians would play their part militarily and politically. September saw an escalation in activity from the IRA in Galway County and City, with successful attacks on RIC barracks and personnel. The escalation of operations by the IRA was met with reprisals from the local RIC, TANs and Ogsies. The brutality of these reprisals were laid bare with the abduction and summary execution of Sinn Féin councillor Mícheál Breathnach on the 19th of October 1920.
So Mícheál, what circumstances got your grandfather to become active in the Republican movement in Galway?
I suppose the way it went, Nish, that he was always involved, and our family, going back for generations, cared about people.
Yes.
And the fact that his country was being occupied by the British government, end of story, and he got active, and over the years, and then he went he was a Sinn Féin councillor in Galway, member of the Galway Urban District Council, and he was always involved in some of the stories that's come back prior to his death were incredible. But he helped people in that because he was quite a well-off businessman at the time, you know, and coming up then closer to, he was on the urban council, and he was a Sinn Féin councillor, and then you had the Black and Tans come here, and he was being warned on several occasions to get out, to go on the run, that they were going to come after him. And then, unfortunately, almost 100 years ago, as we speak, to the day, they eventually came and took him, brought him down to the docks.
And what can you describe, or what you know anyway, of the events that transpired on the night of his death?
Well, I do know that on the night of his death, there was 3 or 4 people in the pub at the old Malt House in High Street, now Amalia's, and they were there. My grandfather was behind the bar, and there was a young man who used to help behind the bar. His name evades me at the moment, and I think it was 4 or 5 of them came in, dressed in plain civilian clothes with long trench coats at that, and they hunted out the people, the customers that were there, and there was this young man that was there. He was only 15 or 16, helping in the bar, and they actually come in and interrogate them one thing or another. They brought him down, and I know he asked could he have a drink before he goes, and said it was a waste, that you only have an hour to live.
So clearly the targeting of Sinn Féin public representatives in 1920 was absolutely no different to the targeting of Sinn Féin councillors by loyalist death squads in the 1990s. This attack on the political legitimacy of the Republican movement is clearly something that your grandfather became a victim of.
Oh yeah.
How do you think that affects us? It surely only makes the Republican movement stronger, that they fear so much.
It strengthens the cause, and it strengthens the belief. Yeah. In my opinion, that people who do take up the struggle for liberty and for freedom from oppression, that they actually, the more they're oppressed, and there's loads of stuff in history books. There's not just me saying it. That the more you oppress people, the more they determined they are to do it, and it carries on. And it's in my own family, it's carried on from generation to generation. One of the biggest fears the British establishment had in this country, and still have it to a certain extent, and capitalism, is educated people. When people get educated, that's when they realise how bad it was. For years, a lot of people were like lambs to the slaughter. But you had a few wise people and educated people. I'm not talking about university degrees and all of that. I'm talking about people who are educated through life and thinking people. They are the ones that carry on the fight. And unfortunately, a lot of people who they become the main enemy of the establishment. That's the biggest fear, you know.
Yeah, and obviously your grandfather's death had a profound effect on your father and his family.
Well, my father never remembered his father, you know, and there was 7 children in it. There was 6 boys. My father was the youngest, and my Aunt Mary was the next, and my Uncle Seamus, etc. And he doesn't really, but he inherited the bloodlines of my grandfather and the belief. And my father and 3 of his brothers were involved with the Republican movement. And my father's mother, Agnes Cotter, she carried on during the War of Independence and during the Civil War. And some of the stuff I'm personally only learning it now of what she was involved in. There was, I can't remember, I think it was 15 men escaped from where the Galway Cathedral is now. That was a jail in Galway. And she actually smuggled in the weapons.
Yeah, and I suppose to say a few words on where you think the struggle's going. We're obviously closer now than we've ever been. Does that give you hope?
I hope. It might have. I think the way the Republican movement is moving now is wonderful. You know, there's always a time for whatever action must be taken. But as a revolution, as a revolutionary, I've always said it, we use whatever means possible. There was a time to use force against the oppressors. Yes, I would support that. Now that time has just passed. And now we go into the political sphere.
We're now moving into the later stages of the decade of centenaries. For you, how important is commemoration of the men and women of the IRA and Common the Man and the children of the Féin? People who went out and gave their lives, whether it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or 30 years ago for our freedom. How important do you think it is that we commemorate them and we keep their memories alive?
Well, the people who have died for this country in the struggle, their memories should be kept alive always. Because without these people that gave and fought and gave the final sacrifice, their lives to the nation, to the people, they deserve recognition in commemoration from now to doomsday. Because if we forget our past, we lose our future completely.
Cllr Mícheál Breathnach, céad bliain ó dul away, agus muidir déanamh cumara air. Nui I bliana ní féidir linn an gná cineál cumara dhéana, mar dhéanamh muid chula blian. Agus muidir clí le srianta COVID-19, ach mollam cumann Ógra hin féin na Galway as cumara seo a Ógra. It's a huge honour to me to have been asked to speak at the centenary commemoration of Mícheál Breathnach. And unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we aren't as able as Republicans as we would usually do this time of year to gather together to remember Mícheál Breathnach. And I want to commend Ógra hin Féin for organising this online commemoration and thank them for inviting me to speak. 2020 sees many centenary commemorations across Galway as a result of the Tan War. In the spring of 1920, an initial phase of the Republican campaign in Galway during the Tan War began with attacks on RIC barracks in the northeast of the county at Castlehacken and Castlegrove. The more tense period of conflict, however, effectively began in September 1920 with the death of RIC Constable Edward Crumb at Galway Railway station, now known as Can Station. And it was reinforced by new special powers passed in Westminster to declare public emergencies and curfews. By Christmas of that year, 13 IRA volunteers or Republican sympathisers in Galway City and County have been killed by British Crown forces. But as Galwegians, or those of us who have chosen Galway as our adopted home, there's a particular onus on us to remember Galway Republicans, those like Mícheál Breathnach, who were murdered for their belief that Ireland could be a completely different place, united and free. And what greater way to commemorate Mícheál Breathnach than by having the Ógra Féin come and continue his work for his vision bearing his name. And Mícheál Breathnach's murder was one of the many brutal killings of the 1920s. He was shot dead on the night of the 19th of October 1920, and I want to give a bit of a background of his life because I think it's very important when we remember our Republican dead that we also understand the context of their own family lives. And Mícheál was first elected as an urban district councillor for Sinn Féin in the local elections of January 1920 along with 9 other Sinn Féiners and was elected in the East Ward. The newspapers reported that he was in a shop on Tuesday the 19th of October, less than 9 months after he'd been elected, when 5 men in civilian clothing carrying revolvers, who turned out to be black and tans, entered and searched the shop, throwing out the customers. They told Mícheál he'd be dead within the hour. And it was early the next day when 5 men were walking to work, a Martin King among them, when they saw a hat on the ground near the river bank, that they looked into the water and saw the body. He was only 42 at the time. And Mícheál Breathnach inspired many generations of Republicans across Galway, and not to mention his own family. Many of Mícheál Breathnach's sons were known Republicans from the 1930s onwards, and their public house on High Street was frequented by many Republicans and IRA volunteers, including Tony Darcy of Michael's native Headford, who would die in hunger strike in 1940 at the hands of the Fianna Fáil government. And his son Ursa Breathnach was a former Republican internee in the Cllr, as well as a Clon Public councillor in Galway, an ITGWU official, while his grandson of the same name is today an active Republican, a Sinn Féin activist, and a former Ballinasloe town councillor. But I firmly believe it is so important that we gather here today. We get so busy with our different political activities that it's important that us as Republicans gather together and remember those who came before us. And I think that the one true commemoration that we will have for all those who were killed will be the establishment of the Republic which they envisage. And I fully believe that we are at the cusp of a great change and of establishing that Republic. And I think this year has been like no other, with the onset of COVID and the pandemic, and also with the issues surrounding Brexit and the fact that British politicians admitted in their own parliament that they are willing to break international law and forget about, as we know, trample on the rights of the people of the North as they have done so often. But it is for the first time that people are coming to me, people who would never have shown that keen an interest in the establishment of the Republic envisaged by the likes of Mícheál Breathnach, who are coming to me and saying to me that a united Ireland makes sense, that Irish unity makes sense, that the fact that the people of the North voted to remain shows the very need for a united Ireland. The fact that COVID shows that we need an all-Ireland approach to this kind of a pandemic. And we need to ensure that we put pressure on the Irish government to push for a unity referendum. And it's often said that we don't have a united Ireland because of London. But it is also true that we don't have a united Ireland because of Dublin. And Liam Mellows predicted that in the treaty debates, that if partition came into being, that those who assumed political power in the 26 county state would seek above all else to hold on to that power. And that prediction has proven correct time and time again. We saw it in recent weeks when we debated Brexit in the Dáil, that they have no interest in pursuing and pushing for Irish unity. And what I would say is that we that we are at the cusp of Irish unity, we are at the cusp of holding a unity referendum, but we must continue the work to ensure that that happens. And we must continue speaking and including everyone in the conversation surrounding a united Ireland, because it is, as Bobby Sands said, the day will dawn when all the people of Ireland will have the desire for freedom to show. It is then we'll see the rising of the moon.